On a rainy afternoon, a millionaire walks with his 6-year-old daughter when suddenly a little beggar girl approaches and whispers something that makes his blood run cold. "Sir, I had a sister just like your daughter." The millionaire initially laughs, thinking it's something typical of a child's imagination, but still decides to ask the girl what the name of this sister who looked like his daughter was. When the child responds, the millionaire goes into absolute shock and almost faints. Right there, the rain beat relentlessly against the asphalt of the main thoroughfare, creating small rivers that snaked between the old cobblestones of the city's historic district. Edward Morgan adjusted the black umbrella over his head, shielding not only himself but, more importantly, little Sophia, his 6-year-old adopted daughter, who walked beside him with small, curious steps. The girl's green eyes shone with fascination as she watched the raindrops dance on the shop windows, her blonde hair escaping from the hood of the pink coat Edward had personally chosen for her that morning. The smell of wet earth mingled with the aroma of coffee wafting from the small cafes, creating a melancholic atmosphere that always stirred an inexplicable nostalgia in Edward. At 42, he had built a corporate empire through calculated decisions and a determination many considered cruel. His business reputation was that of a man who never showed weakness, who turned every no into a new strategy for conquest. But when he looked at Sophia, he felt something else move in his chest, a vulnerability he carefully kept hidden from the world. "Daddy, why are so many people getting wet?" Sophia asked, her sweet voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Edward smiled, gently squeezing his daughter's small hand. "Because not everyone has an umbrella, honey," he replied, his voice laced with a tenderness reserved exclusively for her. "But we do, so we get to share our luck." It was then that she appeared. A small, trembling figure emerged from the shadows of a narrow alleyway, her hesitant steps leaving trails of dirty water on the ground. She was a girl, not much older than Sophia, but the difference between them was as stark as an abyss. While Sophia wore clean, expensive clothes, the little beggar was dressed in soaked rags that clung to her thin body, revealing the fragility of someone who had known only the harshness of life on the streets. The girl's hair, matted and filthy, seemed to have once been blonde, but now hung in dark clumps around a face that held a disturbing maturity for her age. Her eyes, however, were an unmistakable green, the exact same shade as Sophia's. Edward felt a pang in his chest, but attributed it to the natural compassion he felt for vulnerable children. He had contributed to various charities over the years, always discreetly, as if trying to balance some guilt he carried in the depths of his soul. The girl approached slowly, her bare feet making wet, slapping sounds against the pavement. She stopped a few feet away, shivering from the cold, and fixed her gaze directly on Sophia. There was something in that look that made Edward uncomfortable, an intensity that seemed disproportionate for a child. "Mister," the beggar whispered, her trembling voice cutting the air like a sharp blade, "I had a sister who looked just like your daughter." The words hit Edward like a punch to the gut. He glanced from the girl to Sophia, trying to process what he had just heard. Sophia, for her part, had stopped walking and was watching the beggar, with a strange expression, a mixture of curiosity and something Edward couldn't identify. The world around them seemed to slow down. The rain continued to fall, but Edward barely noticed. His heart pounded unevenly as a sense of déjà vu washed over him, as if this moment had been predestined, as if his entire life had been nothing but preparation for this encounter. "Just like my daughter," Edward repeated, forcing a patronizing smile, trying to maintain the composure he had perfected over decades of tough negotiations. "And what was this little sister's name?" The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the sound of the rain and the frantic beating of Edward's heart. The beggar stared at him with those piercing green eyes, and when she finally opened her mouth to answer, her voice came out as a ghostly whisper that would change everything forever. "Sophia," the beggar whispered, her trembling voice echoing, like a phantom between the wet buildings. Her name was Sophia. Edward's world collapsed in that instant. His legs trembled as if the ground had turned to quicksand, and the blood froze in his veins as the umbrella slipped from his numb hands. It hit the pavement with a dull thud, releasing a cascade of water that soaked his expensive Italian leather shoes, but he didn't even notice. "What did you say?" Edward murmured, his voice strangled, almost inaudible. The iron control he had maintained over his emotions for decades began to crack like glass under pressure. The beggar didn't answer immediately. Instead, her green eyes fixed on Sophia with an intensity that sent a chill down Edward's spine. It was as if the girl were seeing a ghost, or perhaps recognizing something that should be impossible to recognize. Sophia, in turn, had let go of her father's hand and taken a step forward, completely ignoring the rain that now soaked her blonde hair. Her childish expression had transformed into something deeper, more ancient. She tilted her head to the side, like a curious bird, and whispered a single word that made Edward's heart nearly stop. "Anna." The beggar began to shake violently, not just from the cold, but from something much deeper. Tears mixed with the rain on her dirty face, and she held out a small, grimy hand toward Sophia, as if wanting to touch a miracle. You remember me, Sophie?" she asked, using a pet name that only Edward and a few close friends knew. The way she pronounced that affectionate diminutive was like a stab to the millionaire's chest. Edward felt the world spin around him. How was it possible that a stranger knew his daughter's intimate nickname? How was it possible that Sophia, who had been adopted as an infant, showed any kind of recognition for a street girl she had theoretically never seen before? "Sophia, come here," Edward said, his voice trembling as he reached for his daughter. But Sophia didn't move. She continued to stare at the beggar with that strange expression, as if trying to remember something lost in the depths of her childhood memory. "Daddy," Sophia murmured, without taking her eyes off the beggar. "She used to sing my name before I went to sleep. Sophia, Sophia, like a song." Her voice came out in a broken whisper, and she began to tremble violently, her small hands clutching her wet coat. Edward felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. That specific melody was something he himself had invented to soothe Sophia during the first years after the adoption. It was a simple, repetitive tune he would hum softly when she had nightmares or couldn't sleep. How could a stranger possibly know about it? The beggar began to hum softly, her childlike voice cutting through the noise of the rain. "Sophia, Sophia, my sister, my light. Sophia, Sophia, hold my memory tight." The melody was exactly the same one Edward used, but with different words, words he had never heard before, but which seemed to fit perfectly with the tune he considered his personal creation. "Stop," Edward said, his voice harsher than he intended. "Stop that right now." But the beggar kept singing, and Sophia began to hum along as if the words were returning to her memory after years of being buried. The two childish voices harmonized in a way that made Edward feel as if he were witnessing something supernatural. "Who are you?" Edward demanded, approaching the beggar with stiff steps. "How do you know that song? How do you know about my daughter?" The beggar stopped singing and faced him with those green eyes that were hauntingly similar to Sophia's. When she spoke, her voice carried a disturbing maturity for her age. "I'm Anna, and Sophia is my twin sister." The silence that followed was Absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain on the asphalt. Edward felt as if the world had stopped spinning, as if time had frozen in that impossible moment. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about Sophia, about the past he had so carefully constructed, began to crumble like a house of cards in a storm. "That's impossible," Edward muttered, more to himself than to the two girls watching him under the incessant rain. His rational mind, trained to analyze data and find logical solutions to complex problems, refused to accept what was happening before his eyes. "Sophia has no siblings. She was an orphaned infant when I adopted her. I have all the documents, all the certificates." His voice gained strength as he spoke, as if repeating the known facts could force reality back to normal. "You must be confused, little girl. You must have seen my daughter in a magazine or newspaper. We're a well-known family in this city." But even as he spoke the words, Edward felt a corrosive doubt growing in his chest like a weed. Anna kept looking at Sophia with that disturbing intensity, and Sophia returned the gaze with an expression Edward had never seen before, a mixture of recognition and nostalgia that seemed impossible in a 6-year-old. "Sophie has a mark here," Anna said, touching her own left arm, "just like mine. It looks like a tiny moon." Edward's heart leaped. Sophia did have a crescent moon-shaped birthmark on her left arm, something the doctors had said was extremely rare. It was a quirk he loved to kiss during Sophia's baths, a mark she considered special because he always said it made her unique in the world. "Show him, Sophie," Anna continued, her voice carrying an intimate familiarity that made Edward feel like an intruder in a conversation with his own daughter. Sophia, without hesitation, pulled up the sleeve of her coat and showed the small mark. Anna did the same, revealing an identical mark in the exact same spot. The two girls compared their arms as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and Edward felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "A coincidence," Edward muttered, but his voice was weak, unconvincing. "Birthmarks can be similar. That doesn't prove anything." Anna faced him with those piercing green eyes and said something that made Edward's blood run cold. "She curls up like a kitten when she sleeps, always with the pink bunny that has one crooked ear. And when she has a nightmare, she whispers 'Mommy' 3 times before she wakes up." Edward felt his legs weaken. No one, absolutely no one but him, knew these intimate details of Sophia's sleeping habits. The pink bunny was a toy Sophia had gotten as a baby and never let go of. At bedtime, the crooked ear was the result of years of cuddles and nightly squeezes, and the detail about the nightmares, Edward was the only one who stayed up on difficult nights, listening to Sophia murmur for a mother she had never consciously known. "How do you know that?" Edward asked, his voice a strangled whisper. "How can you possibly know these things?" Anna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved closer to Sophia, completely ignoring Edward, and began to whisper something in the girl's ear. Edward couldn't hear the words, but he saw Sophia nod vigorously, as if receiving confirmation of something she had always known, but could never name. "Daddy," Sophia said, turning to Edward with tears in her eyes. "She knows about the secret place. In my room, where I hide my treasures." Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Sophia's secret place was a small box hidden behind a loose baseboard in her room, a hiding spot she had discovered on her own and used to store small objects she considered precious. Edward only knew about it because he occasionally found her playing there, but he had never told anyone, respecting his daughter's privacy. "She said there's a ring from Mommy in there," Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "A gold ring with a little blue stone." Edward's world shattered once more. There was indeed a ring in Sophia's secret box, a simple gold band with a small blue stone that had been found with her at the orphanage. Edward had kept it as a memento of Sophia's biological mother, planning to give it to her when she was older. He had never mentioned its existence to anyone. The rain continued to fall, but Edward barely felt it. His mind was racing, trying to find rational explanations for the impossible. Maybe it was an elaborate coincidence. Maybe Anna was part of some sophisticated scam targeting wealthy families. Maybe he was going insane. But when he looked at the two girls side by side, wet and shivering, he saw something he couldn't deny. They were practically identical. The same green eyes, the same facial structure, even the same way of tilting their heads when concentrating. The only real difference was their clothes and their state of being. One cared for and loved, the other abandoned and forgotten. "This can't be happening," Edward muttered, running his hands through his wet hair. "This just can't be happening." But it was. And in the depths of his heart, Edward began to realize that his perfect, carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down completely. Edward spent the entire night in his leather armchair in his study, staring at Sophia's adoption. Papers spread across the mahogany desk. Every document had been examined dozens of times over the years. Certificates, medical reports, orphanage records. Everything seemed perfectly legal and in order, but now every line looked suspicious, every stamp a potential forgery. In front of him, photographs of baby Sophia contrasted with a persistent mental image. Anna, the street girl, with the same green eyes and the same determined expression. Edward had tried to convince himself it was all just a bizarre coincidence, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Anna's voice singing that impossible melody. The first sign that something was truly wrong came the next morning. Edward found Sophia sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by dozens of drawings she had made during the night. On each sheet of paper, two identical girls appeared hand in hand, but in every drawing something separated them. Sometimes a black line, other times faceless, shadowy figures. "Sophia, honey, when did you make these drawings?" Edward asked, kneeling beside his daughter. His voice tried to maintain its usual calm, but there was a tension Sophia immediately noticed. "When Anna was calling," Sophia replied, without looking up from the paper where she was obsessively drawing two identical crying girls. "She was calling my name, so I woke up and drew, so she wouldn't be sad." A chill ran down Edward's spine. "Anna was calling, but she's not here, honey. It was just a dream." Sophia stopped drawing and looked at him with those green eyes that now seemed to hold a depth disturbing for a 6-year-old. "It wasn't a dream, Daddy. Anna is always calling. Ever since I was a tiny baby, she calls my name when she's scared." Edward felt the air leave his lungs. How was it possible that Sophia had memories of someone she had supposedly never met? The doctors had always said that infant memories were extremely rare and usually inaccurate. "Sophie," Edward said, choosing his words carefully, "do you remember when you were a baby, before you came to live with me?" Sophia nodded vigorously, as if it were obvious. "I remember Anna. We slept together in a small bed. She always held my hand when there was noise from the men fighting." Her voice grew lower, sadder. "Then one day the men took her away and I cried a lot, but you came to get me and said you would take care of me." Edward's heart was beating so hard he was sure Sophia could hear it. Each of the girl's words was a piece of a puzzle he didn't want to assemble, but which was forming inexorably before his eyes. "And you never told me this before because you got sad when I talked about Anna," Sophia replied, returning to her drawing. "So I stopped talking, but I never stopped remembering." Edward stood up abruptly, needing air. He left Sophia's room and leaned against the hallway wall, trying to control his ragged breathing. His daughter had kept secrets for years to protect his feelings. What kind of father was he, if Sophia felt she couldn't share her memories with him? The phone rang, interrupting his tortured thoughts. It was Helen, the housekeeper who had cared for the house for over 10 years. "Mr. Morgan," her voice sounded worried, "the gardener said he saw a little girl lurking around the house during the night. He said she stood under Sophia's window for a long time, as if she were waiting for something." Edward's blood ran cold. What kind of girl? Blonde, thin, torn clothes. He found it strange because the girl seemed to know exactly which room was Sophia's, even though she's never been here before. Edward's hands trembled as he hung up the phone. Anna had found his house. More than that, she had specifically found Sophia's room, as if guided by some supernatural instinct. He went back to Sophia's room and found her standing at the window, looking out at the garden with an anxious expression. "She was here, Daddy," Sophia said without turning around. "Anna was down there looking up at me. She was crying." "How do you know she was crying if it was dark?" Edward asked, approaching the window. Sophia finally turned, and Edward saw tears streaming down her face. "Because when Anna cries, I feel it in here," she said, placing her small hand over her heart. "It's like I'm crying too." Edward looked down at the garden, but there was no sign of anyone, just the flowers he had planted for Sophia and the swing set where she played every afternoon. But something in the air felt different, charged with a sadness he couldn't explain. "Daddy," Sophia said, pulling his sleeve, "why can't you and Anna be friends? Why does she have to stay on the street when she has a home here with me?" The innocent question struck Edward like a well-aimed arrow. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that the adult world was full of complications she couldn't possibly understand? How could he tell her he was afraid of discovering truths that could destroy everything he had built? "It's complicated, honey," Edward murmured, pulling Sophia into his arms. "Very complicated." But as he held his daughter, Edward knew he could no longer run from the truth. The cracks in his perfect reality were becoming deep fissures, and soon everything would come crashing down. Edward drummed his fingers nervously on the desk as he waited in the office of Marcus Thorne, the most respected private investigator in the city. The office was discreet and professional, with shelves full of files and an atmosphere that suggested years of uncovered secrets and unearthed truths. Edward had chosen Marcus precisely for his reputation of absolute discretion and relentless efficiency. "Mr. Morgan," Marcus said, entering the room with a thick file in his hands, "I received your urgent call. As I understand it, you need an investigation into your daughter's adoption process." Edward nodded, trying to maintain the businesslike composure that had made him famous in financial circles. "I want you to check every detail, every document, every person involved in Sophia's adoption. Leave no stone unturned. May I ask the reason for this investigation? Usually parents only question adoption processes when there's a suspicion of serious irregularities." Edward hesitated. How could he explain that a street girl had appeared knowing impossible details about his daughter? How could he describe the growing feeling that his entire life was built on a lie? "Conflicting information has come to light," he said finally. "I need to be certain that everything was done correctly." Marcus jotted down some notes. "I'll need all the original documents, names of the orphanage staff you dealt with, specific dates. How much time do I have?" "As soon as possible." Money is no object. 2 days later, Edward received a call from Marcus that made his world tremble again. "Mr. Morgan, I need to see you urgently. I found some inconsistencies that require a face-to-face discussion." Edward cancelled all his meetings and rushed to the investigator's office. Marcus was waiting for him, with a grim expression, surrounded by piles of documents and photographs. "What did you find?" Edward asked, trying to control the anxiety building in his chest. First, the good news. Sophia's adoption was entirely legal and all the paperwork is in order. Marcus paused meaningfully. But there are problems with the original orphanage records. Edward's stomach tightened. What kind of problems? The files that are on record as the originals were created 3 days after you filed the adoption request. The actual original records mysteriously disappeared around the same time. Marcus opened an envelope and spread photographs on the desk. I managed to get access to the orphanage's security logs. Look at these images. Edward looked at the black and white photos, dated 6 years ago. In one of them, he could clearly see 2 very small children in the same crib. 2 identical girls, huddled together as they slept. Sophia wasn't alone at the orphanage, Marcus said, his voice heavy with gravity. There was another child with her, a girl with nearly identical physical features. Edward felt his legs weaken. And where is this child now? That's the problem. There are no adoption records for the second child. She simply vanished from the files, as if she never existed. Marcus flipped over one of the photos. Look at the back of this one. With trembling hands, Edward read the handwritten note. Sophia and Anna, inseparable twins, arrived together in December. The name Anna pulsed before his eyes like an open wound. Everything was being confirmed in the worst possible way. There's more, Marcus continued. I managed to locate a former employee of the orphanage who worked there at the time. She agreed to speak with us, but only under conditions of total anonymity. She says she's afraid. Afraid of what? Of the people who orchestrated the children's separation. Edward ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the revelations crush his shoulders. When can we meet her? Tonight, at a neutral location. But Mr. Morgan, I have to warn you. From what this woman implied over the phone, what we're about to find out could be much worse than we imagine. That night, Edward met Marcus and a middle-aged woman in a small, discreet coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. The woman, who identified herself only as Carmen, seemed nervous and kept looking over her shoulder. I remember the twins, Carmen said, her voice trembling. They arrived together, tiny babies, always clinging to each other. They would cry if they were separated, even for a few minutes. What happened to Anna? Edward asked directly. Carmen closed her eyes as if fighting painful memories. There was pressure. Important people wanting only one of the children to be put up for adoption. They said it would be better for Sophia to have a wealthy family, but that Anna should remain at the orphanage. Deep why? That makes no sense. Because someone very powerful wanted the girls to be raised separately, someone who had an interest in keeping them apart. Carmen leaned forward, whispering, I overheard conversations between the director and men in suits. They talked about experiments, about studying what happens to identical twins raised in completely different environments. Edward felt nausea rising in his throat. Experiments? What kind of experiments? I don't know the details, but I know Anna was never really put up for adoption. At age 3, she just disappeared from the orphanage. They said she ran away, but a 3-year-old doesn't just run away on her own. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Edward looked at Marcus, who was furiously scribbling in his notepad. Is there anything else we should know? Marcus asked. Carmen hesitated, then whispered something that made Edward's blood run cold. Sophia wasn't the only child subjected to special treatments. Every day, doctors would come to give her medicine. They said it was to help with her adjustment, but I always found it strange. A healthy child doesn't need so much medication. Edward spent the rest of the night poring over Sophia's medical files. each prescription and report taking on a sinister meaning in light of Carmen's revelations. By the first light of dawn, he had found disturbing evidence that confirmed his worst fears. During her first 3 years of life, Sophia had been given an abnormal amount of medication for a healthy child. Infant antidepressants, sedatives, and something called Memex-7, a drug Edward had never questioned when the orphanage pediatrician insisted it was essential for the girl's healthy cognitive development. With trembling hands, Edward called Dr. Henry Wallace, the most respected pediatric neurologist in the city and a personal friend for years. "Henry, I need an urgent favor. Have you ever heard of a drug called Memex-7? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Edward, where did you hear about that? Memex-7 isn't approved for commercial use." Edward's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "It's an experimental drug that was being tested a few years ago for treating severe childhood trauma. The goal was to erase specific memories that caused post-traumatic stress in children." Henry paused. "But the trials were shut down when they discovered severe side effects." "What kind of side effects?" "Selective amnesia, psychotic episodes in adolescence, and in some cases, what researchers called traumatic reconnection, when the erased memories return in a fragmented and chaotic way." Henry's voice was heavy with concern. "Edward, why are you asking about this?" Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the truth crush his shoulders. Sophia was on this drug for 3 years. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Henry whispered, "My God, Edward, you need to bring her in for a consultation immediately. If she was really medicated with Memex-7, she's entering the age where the side effects begin to manifest." Edward hung up and ran to Sophia's room. He found her awake, sitting on the bed with the pink bunny in her lap, but there was something different in her expression. Her green eyes seemed more distant, older. "Daddy," Sophia said, her voice sounding strangely calm, "I remember more things today." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, trying to control the tremor in his hands. "What kind of things, honey?" "I remember the men in white coats who came to give me medicine. They said the medicine would make me forget the sad things." Sophia hugged the bunny tighter, "But I didn't want to forget Anna, so I pretended to swallow the pill, but I hid it under my tongue." Edward felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "You pretended to take the medicine?" Sophia nodded. "Not always. Sometimes they made me. But a lot of the time, I could pretend." She looked at him with those piercing green eyes. "That's why I still remember Anna, Daddy. That's why I know she needs us." Tears began to stream down Edward's face. His 6-year-old daughter had outsmarted doctors and researchers, protecting her own memories through a desperate, childish ruse. "Sophia, do you remember anything about the doctors? Did they talk to each other?" Sophia closed her eyes, concentrating. "They talked about the twin experiment. They said I was subject A and Anna was subject B. That you were going to give me a good life to see if I turned out different from Anna." The horror of the situation hit Edward in successive waves. Sophia and Anna hadn't just been separated. They had been turned into guinea pigs in a cruel social experiment. One would receive love, care, and resources, while the other would be abandoned to her fate on the streets, all to see how environment would shape 2 genetically identical children. "Did they talk about who was paying for the experiment?" Edward asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia shook her head. "I only heard a name once. They called it Project Gemini, and they talked about an important man who wanted to see if people are born bad or if their lives make them bad." Edward felt nausea rising in his throat. Project Gemini sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, but it was happening to his daughter, to Anna, to two innocent children who had been turned into lab rats. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Marcus, the investigator. "Edward, I've discovered something disturbing. The orphanage where Sophia was kept wasn't just a regular orphanage. It was run by a foundation with ties to a multinational pharmaceutical company, a company that develops experimental drugs." "Which company?" Edward asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Neurotech Industries. And Edward, you're not going to believe this, but the CEO of Neurotech Industries was present at Sophia's adoption ceremony. He was there, observing the entire process." Edward felt the world spin around him. Neurotech Industries was a company his own corporation had occasional partnerships with. He had been in the same room, shaken hands, done business with the man who had orchestrated the separation of Sophia and Anna. "Marcus," Edward said, his voice a whisper, "I need a list of every Neurotech executive who was involved with the orphanage, and I need to know if any of them have personal connections to me." "Edward, are you all right? Your voice sounds strange." Edward looked at Sophia, who was watching him with that expression far too mature for her age. "No, Marcus, I'm not all right, and I have a feeling it's going to get much worse before it gets better." As he hung up the phone, Edward realized he wasn't just an innocent victim in this conspiracy. Somehow, he had been specifically chosen to adopt Sophia. That meant someone had been watching him, studying him, and manipulating him for years, turning him into an unwitting pawn in the cruel experiment that had destroyed the lives of two innocent children. Edward was in his study when Marcus arrived with a red folder in his hands and an expression that foreshadowed bad news. The investigator seemed to have aged years in a few days, and his eyes carried the weight of secrets he wished he had never uncovered. "Edward, I need you to sit down before you see this," Marcus said, placing the folder on the desk. "What I've found is going to change everything you believe about your own life." Edward sat down slowly, bracing himself for another devastating revelation. Over the past few weeks, his reality had been systematically demolished, and he was beginning to wonder if any aspect of his life was genuine. Marcus opened the folder and took out a series of documents and photographs. Neurotech Industries is controlled by a single majority shareholder, a man who keeps his identity carefully hidden behind multiple shell companies. "Who is it?" Edward asked, though something in his gut already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. Marcus placed a photograph on the desk. It was an image of a well-dressed, middle-aged man with facial features that made Edward's blood run cold. "Your brother, Gabriel Morgan." The world stopped. Edward stared at the photograph as if he were looking at a ghost, because in a way he was. Gabriel had supposedly died in a car crash 15 years ago. Edward had attended the funeral, had wept over the casket, had carried the weight of guilt for years. "That's impossible," Edward murmured, his hands trembling as he held the photograph. "Gabriel is dead. I was at the funeral." "The man who died in the crash was a hired body double," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "Gabriel faked his own death to escape gambling debts and start a new life with a false identity." "But, Edward, there's more." Marcus placed another document on the desk. "Gabriel is not only alive, but he's been watching you all these years. He orchestrated your rise in business, manipulated your investments, and even influenced your decision to adopt a child." Edward felt as if he were falling into a bottomless pit. "You're telling me that Gabriel, that my brother, your brother is the mastermind behind Project Gemini. He chose Sophia specifically for you. He separated the twins knowing that you, with your psychological profile of a controlling but fundamentally good-hearted person, would be the perfect adoptive father to contrast with the neglect Anna would suffer." The words hit Edward like daggers. Gabriel, the brother he had loved and blamed himself for over years, had turned his entire life into a cruel experiment. "Why?" Edward whispered. "Why would he do this?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "From the records I accessed, it seems Gabriel never got over the resentment of being the second son. You were fraternal twins, born 15 minutes apart, but you were always the parents' favorite, the more successful, the more loved." Edward vaguely remembered their childhood rivalry, but he never imagined it could have festered into something so destructive. Gabriel developed an obsession with the idea that environment completely shapes a person, denying the importance of genetics or innate character. Marcus continued. Project Gemini was his way of proving that even identical twins could become completely different if raised in opposite environments. "And he used my daughter as a guinea pig," Edward said, his voice filled with a cold fury he had never felt before. "There's more, Edward. Gabriel didn't just watch the experiment from afar. He has maintained close contact with your life. Some of your closest business partners are actually his agents. He knows every decision you make, every move Sophia makes, every moment of happiness you've shared." Edward stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Where is he? Where is Gabriel now?" "That's the most disturbing part," Marcus said, pulling another document from the folder. "Gabriel owns an industrial compound on the outskirts of the city. That's where he keeps his labs and where Anna has been held." "Anna is with him?" "Edward, Anna was never really on the streets on her own. Gabriel has been using her as the other half of the experiment. She is kept in controlled conditions of deprivation, deliberately exposed to neglect and trauma to maximize the contrast with Sophia's privileged life." The reality hit Edward like an avalanche. The beggar he had met on the street, Anna shivering from cold and hunger, was not an ordinary street child. She was a prisoner who had been temporarily released for that specific encounter. Gabriel had orchestrated everything: the meeting in the rain, the recognition between the twins, the awakening of Sophia's memories. "He wanted me to find out," Edward murmured, the realization dawning on him in a wave of horror. "Gabriel wanted me to know about Anna. This is also part of the experiment." Marcus nodded grimly. "From the records I found, this phase was called controlled reconnection. Gabriel wanted to study what would happen when Sophia and Anna were reunited, how it would affect their psychological development." Edward felt nausea rising in his throat. His daughter Anna himself, they were all rats in a maze created by Gabriel's sick mind. Even his emotions as a protective father were being catalogued and studied. "Where exactly is this compound?" Edward asked, his voice taking on an iron resolve. "Edward, you can't just go there. Gabriel has security, and if he realizes we've found his location—" "He'll do what?" Edward interrupted. "Fake his death again, destroy more innocent lives." He leaned over the desk, facing Marcus. "My brother turned my daughter into a test subject. He tortured Anna for years. And you think I'm going to sit here?" Marcus sighed, knowing he couldn't dissuade Edward. "Then we'll need a plan. Gabriel is dangerous, and he has resources we can't even imagine." Edward glanced once more at the photograph of Gabriel, childhood memories mixing with the current reality in a nauseating way. The brother who had taught him to ride a bike, who had shared childhood secrets and dreams, had become the architect of his greatest tragedy. "No," Edward said, his voice as cold as ice. "We don't need an elaborate plan. We're going straight to the source. I want you to arrange a meeting with Gabriel. Tell him I've found out everything and I want to make a deal." "Edward, that's suicide. You don't know what Gabriel is capable of." Edward smiled, but there was something predatory in that smile. "He also doesn't know what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family." Edward spent the next 3 days preparing for the confrontation with Gabriel, but first he needed to understand exactly what his brother had done to Anna all these years. Marcus managed to access confidential medical reports through his contacts in the investigative underworld, and what they discovered made Edward physically sick with horror. Anna hadn't just been neglected. She had been subjected to a systematic protocol of emotional and physical deprivation. The documents revealed a meticulous schedule. Periods of controlled starvation alternated with basic sustenance, social isolation interrupted only by observation sessions, and a regimen of drugs that kept her cognitive abilities intact while amplifying her emotional vulnerability. "Edward, you need to see this," Marcus said, spreading medical photos across the table. "These are images of Anna taken over the years." Edward forced himself to look, though each picture was like a stab to the heart. Anna at 3, thin but with a spark of childhood still in her eyes. Anna at 4, visibly more withdrawn. Anna at 5, with a distant gaze and a defensive posture. The progression was like watching the slow death of a child's soul. The reports indicate Gabriel kept Anna in a state of optimized deprivation, Marcus explained, his voice thick with disgust. Enough deprivation to create trauma and emotional dependency, but not enough to cause permanent physical damage that would invalidate the experiment. Edward clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. That monster documented the torture of a child as if it were a research project. There's more. Anna was conditioned to believe that Sophia had abandoned her voluntarily. Gabriel created a narrative where Sophia had chosen a wealthy family and left Anna behind. Part of the experiment was to study how resentment and perceived rejection would shape Anna's personality. The revelation struck Edward like lightning. Anna hadn't just suffered physical deprivation. She had been psychologically tortured with the belief that her twin sister had rejected her. The meeting on the street had been orchestrated for Anna to confront Sophia with this manufactured resentment, but instead the genuine love between the sisters had prevailed. "Where is Anna now?" Edward asked. Marcus hesitated. "According to the latest information I could get, she's in a subterranean facility on Gabriel's compound. It's described as a controlled observation environment, basically a prison disguised as a laboratory." Edward stood up and began pacing, his mind working on multiple fronts. "I need to get Anna out of there, but I also need to make sure Gabriel can never do this to another child." "Edward, you're talking about invading a private, heavily secured property. This is what any father would do for his daughter," Edward interrupted. "Anna is my daughter just as much as Sophia is. Gabriel may have manipulated the circumstances, but that doesn't change my responsibility for her." At that moment, Edward heard small footsteps on the stairs. Sophia appeared at the study door, clutching her pink bunny, her expression worried. "Daddy, why are you yelling?" she asked, approaching cautiously. Edward knelt and opened his arms, and Sophia ran into them. As he held his daughter, he felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about confronting Gabriel. It was about reuniting a family that had been brutally torn apart. "Sophia, honey," Edward said softly, "how would you feel if we could bring Anna to live with us?" Sophia's green eyes lit up in a way Edward hadn't seen in weeks. "For real, Daddy, Anna could be my real sister." "She has always been your real sister," Edward replied, feeling tears well up. "We just didn't know it." Sophia pulled back slightly and looked seriously at her father. "Daddy, Anna is hurt on the inside. I feel it when I dream about her. She thinks I don't like her." The maturity of Sophia's observations stunned Edward. "Why do you think that?" "Because in my dreams, she's always crying and saying I left her all alone." Sophia clutched the pink bunny to her chest. "But I never left her on purpose, Daddy. I was too little to choose. Edward hugged Sophia tighter, amazed by the emotional wisdom his daughter had developed despite her young age. "You're right, honey. And when we bring Anna home, we're going to show her you never forgot her." Marcus, who had watched the exchange in silence, stepped closer. "Edward, there's something else you need to know about Anna. The medical reports indicate she's developed a severe form of attachment disorder. She's been conditioned to distrust any show of affection, to interpret kindness as manipulation." What does that mean in practice? It means that when Anna is removed from her current environment, she'll likely react with hostility and fear. She might even reject Sophia at first, because she's been taught that her sister abandoned her. Sophia tugged on Edward's sleeve. "Daddy, I can help Anna remember when we were babies. I still know the song we sang together." Edward looked at Marcus with a determined expression. "I don't care how long it takes or how hard it is. Anna is my daughter, and I'm bringing her home." And Gabriel? A coldness settled in Edward's chest, the same calculated coldness that had made him one of the most feared businessmen in the city. Gabriel will pay for every day of suffering he caused. Anna, but first, I need to make sure both of my daughters are safe. He stood up, lifting Sophia into his arms. "Marcus, arrange the meeting with Gabriel. But I also want you to have a rescue team on standby. If things go wrong, I want Anna out of that prison before Gabriel can use her as a shield." "Edward, you're playing with fire. Gabriel has years of a head start and resources we can't even fathom." Edward smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Gabriel may have created this game, Marcus, but he forgot one important thing. I learned how to play by watching him, and now I'm playing to win." The restaurant was a discreet, high-end steakhouse, the kind of place where powerful men made life-altering deals. Edward arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a table that gave him a full view of the room. His mind was as sharp as a razor, every muscle tense with anticipation for the meeting he had been unconsciously waiting for 15 years. Gabriel walked in exactly on time, and Edward felt as if he were watching a ghost materialize before him. 15 years had changed his brother, the hair now graying at the temples, deep lines around the eyes, a posture that radiated power and control. But they were the same cold eyes Edward remembered from childhood, eyes that always calculated, the advantage in every situation. "Edward," Gabriel said, sitting down with the casual air of a man who had never faked his own death. "You look terrible. Fatherhood hasn't been kind to you." Edward forced himself to maintain his composure, though every fiber of his being screamed to strangle the man across from him. "Gabriel, or should I use the fake name you've been using?" Gabriel smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "Gabriel is fine. We are family after all." He signaled the waiter and ordered wine, as if they were just two brothers, catching up after a normal separation. "Why did you do it?" Edward asked, cutting straight to the point. "Why separate two innocent children? Why torture Anna?" "Torture?" Gabriel laughed, a humorless sound that sent a shiver down Edward's spine. "Edward, you've always been so dramatic. Anna is receiving a specialized education. She's learning about resilience, about survival, about the true nature of life." "She's a 6-year-old child, precisely the perfect age to mold fundamental behaviors." Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a sick, scientific enthusiasm. "Do you know how many studies have been done on twins separated at birth? Hundreds, but never with total control over the environmental variables, never with detailed documentation from day one." Edward felt nausea rising in his throat. "You're talking about Anna and Sophia as if they were lab rats." "They are unique data points, Edward, genetically perfect, identical. Twins, raised in completely opposite yet controlled environments. Sophia represents the ideal of privilege, love, and security. Anna represents deprivation, struggle, and forced independence. Gabriel took a sip of wine, savoring both the drink and the explanation of his sinister work. And me? What was my role? In your sick experiment? Gabriel's smile widened. Ah, Edward, you were the most careful choice of all. I needed an adoptive father who was wealthy enough to give Sophia every possible advantage, but also emotionally damaged enough to project his own needs onto the child. What are you talking about? Your guilt complex over my death, your need for control disguised as protection, your inability to form intimate adult relationships. Gabriel listed the traits as if reading from a grocery list. You were the perfect father for Sophia because you needed her just as much as she needed you. Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Even his capacity to love Sophia had been manipulated and exploited by Gabriel. You watched our lives all these years, Edward said, the realization coming in waves of horror. You saw Sophia take her first steps, say her first words. I documented everything meticulously. Every developmental milestone, every emotional reaction, every bond formed. Gabriel took a tablet from his briefcase and swiped through some images. I have over 15,000 hours of video of Sophia, and the same amount for Anna, of course. Edward looked at the images and saw intimate moments from his life with Sophia, her first day of school, birthdays, even private moments at home. The violation was so profound, he found it hard to breathe. You're sick, Edward murmured. I'm a visionary, Gabriel corrected him. This study will revolutionize our understanding of nature versus nurture. It will prove definitively that environment trumps genetics in the formation of human character. And what if you're wrong? What if Anna and Sophia show that love and a sibling bond overcome any conditioning? Gabriel laughed again, but this time there was a note of uncertainty. Anna hates Sophia, Edward. She's been conditioned to see her as the one responsible for her abandonment. When they are fully reunited, Anna will try to destroy everything Sophia represents. Anna doesn't hate Sophia, Edward said with conviction. I saw them together. I saw the recognition, the love. You saw what I allowed you to see. That meeting in the rain was carefully orchestrated. Anna was on anxiolytics to control her baseline aggression. Gabriel leaned further forward. Do you want to see how Anna really feels about Sophia? He slid the tablet toward Edward, displaying a video of Anna in a sterile room. In the recording, Anna was holding a blonde doll and repeatedly slamming it against the wall while screaming, "Bad Sophia, you left me," with a fury that seemed impossible in such a small child. Tears burned Edward's eyes. You conditioned her to hate her own sister. I freed her from the illusion of fraternal love. Anna now understands she can only rely on herself. Gabriel put the tablet away. It's a valuable lesson that Sophia, sheltered by your paternal love, never had to learn. Zujul. Where is Anna now? Edward asked, his voice dangerously low. Safe, cared for, continuing her unique education. I want to see her. Gabriel laughed. Of course you do. That's exactly what I expected you to ask. He stood, leaving cash on the table. Tomorrow night at my estate, bring Sophia. It's time for the final phase of the experiment. What final phase? Aye. Gabriel stopped and turned, his eyes gleaming with a sinister anticipation. The controlled reunion of the twins. I want to see what happens when Anna, with all her conditioned rage, meets Sophia again in an environment where I control all the variables. And if I refuse, then Anna will continue her education indefinitely, and you will live the rest of your life knowing you chose to protect one daughter at the expense of the other. Gabriel smiled cruelly. Until tomorrow, brother. Edward was left alone at the table, the weight of impossible choices crushing his shoulders. Gabriel had created the perfect dilemma. To save Anna, he would have to endanger Sophia. But there was something Gabriel didn't know. Edward had also learned how to plan, and this time he was playing to win it all. Edward spent a sleepless night, developing a plan that could either save his daughters or completely destroy their lives. Every move had to be calculated with surgical precision, because Gabriel had proven he was always 3 steps ahead. But Edward had an advantage his brother didn't expect. He wasn't just fighting for revenge, but for the future of 2 innocent children. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Edward's office with a small but highly qualified team. Ex-special forces, security experts, and a child psychologist specializing in severe trauma. Edward had spent a fortune in 24 hours, but money was irrelevant when it came to Sophia and Anna. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Marcus introduced, gesturing to a woman in her 40s with kind but determined eyes. She's worked with child victims of human trafficking and illegal medical experiments. If anyone can help Anna through the transition, it's her. Edward shook the psychologist's hand. Dr. Reed, I need you to understand. Anna has been conditioned to hate Sophia. Gabriel showed me videos of Anna attacking a doll that represents her twin sister. Conditioning can be reversed, Dr. Reed said with professional confidence. But it will take time, patience, and most importantly, consistent demonstrations of unconditional love. The genetic bond between twins is stronger than any psychological manipulation. How much time? Edward asked. To break the initial conditioning? Perhaps weeks. For a full recovery? Years. But Mr. Morgan, based on what you told me about their meeting in the rain, Anna still has access to her original memories of love for Sophia. That is crucial. Marcus approached with blueprints of Gabriel's estate. I got these from a contact at the city planning office. The property is vast, but we've identified the location of the subterranean lab. The problem is security. Edward studied the blueprints, his business mind automatically identifying weak points and opportunities. Gabriel wants me to bring Sophia to him. That means he can't use overwhelming force without risking injury to Sophia in the process. Unless Sophia is part of his endgame, Marcus observed grimly. No, Edward said with absolute certainty. Gabriel may be a monster, but he needs Sophia intact for the experiment to have any scientific validity. He won't physically harm her. Dr. Reed leaned over the plans. Where exactly is Anna being held? Marcus pointed to a section marked in red. According to our intel, there's a subterranean facility here. 3 levels below ground, accessible only by a single code-secured elevator. What if we get Anna out of there before the meeting, without Gabriel noticing? Edward asked. Impossible, Marcus replied. Gabriel has security cameras everywhere. He'd know instantly if Anna was moved. Edward was silent for several minutes, processing information and possibilities. Finally, he turned to the team with a determined expression. We're not going to try to rescue Anna before the meeting, he said, surprising everyone. We're going to use the meeting to our advantage. Edward, that's suicide, Marcus protested. No, it's strategy. Gabriel wants to document the twins' reunion. He'll be so focused on recording every reaction that he won't notice what's really happening. Edward pointed to different locations on the blueprints. Dr. Reed, I want you hidden here, ready to intervene the moment we signal. Marcus, your men will be positioned at the exit points. And Sophia, Dr. Reed asked, are you really going to expose her to this? Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Sophia wants to see Anna. She's been asking about her sister every day. And more importantly, Anna needs to see that Sophia never willingly abandoned her. It's too risky, Marcus insisted. Everything is risky now. Edward walked to the window, looking down at the garden where Sophia was playing with her nanny. But I have an advantage Gabriel isn't considering. Which is? Sophia. She is stronger and smarter than anyone imagines, and she loves Anna with a purity that Gabriel has never been able to completely corrupt. At that moment, Sophia ran into the office, her blonde hair flying, a radiant smile on her face. "Daddy, I dreamed about Anna again. She was singing our song, but this time she was happy." Sophia jumped into Edward's lap. "When are we going to get her?" Edward hugged his daughter, feeling tears form in his eyes. "Tonight, honey. We're going to see Anna tonight." "For real?" Sophia pulled back to look into her father's eyes, checking if he was serious. "For real. But Sophia, Anna might be different. She might be scared or confused. Can you be very brave and patient with her?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "I can sing our song so she remembers we're sisters, and I can share my pink bunny until she gets one of her own." The simple, pure-heartedness of Sophia's solution deeply touched everyone in the room. Dr. Reed whispered, "Perhaps she's right. Perhaps love really is stronger than conditioning." Edward set Sophia on the floor. "Honey, go play in the garden while Daddy finishes his work. Tonight is going to be a very important night." After Sophia left, Edward turned to his team. Gabriel underestimated one fundamental thing. He knows Edward, the businessman, the man manipulated by guilt. But he doesn't know Edward the father, and a father protecting his daughters is capable of anything. Marcus checked his watch. "We have 8 hours to finalize preparations." "Then let's get to work," Edward said, his voice filled with an iron resolve. "Gabriel created this game, but tonight the rules change." As the team dispersed for final preparations, Edward remained at the window, watching Sophia play in the garden. In a few hours, he would be face to face with Anna, the daughter he never knew he had, in a situation orchestrated by a brother who had become his worst nightmare. But for the first time in weeks, Edward felt something besides fear and confusion. He felt hope, because regardless of what Gabriel had planned, there was a force in the universe he could not control, the genuine love between two sisters that not even the cruelest separation had managed to destroy. Gabriel's estate stretched across acres of isolated land, surrounded by high walls and electronic gates that opened automatically as Edward approached. Sophia sat beside him in the back seat, clutching her pink bunny and quietly humming the melody she had always associated with Anna. Edward tried to maintain an outward calm, but his heart was pounding like a war drum. "Daddy, why is Uncle Gabriel's house so dark?" Sophia asked, observing the imposing mansion that rose before them like a sinister fortress. "Sometimes people get sad and choose to live in dark places," Edward replied, parking in front of a grand entrance. "But we're here to bring some light." Gabriel was waiting for them at the main door, impeccably dressed and with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Edward could see 2 men in dark suits, security disguised as assistants. "Edward! Sophia!" Gabriel approached with open arms, like an affectionate uncle welcoming beloved guests. "What a joy to have you here." Sophia hid behind her father's legs, instinctively distrusting the man who radiated a coldness she couldn't comprehend, but definitely felt. "Where is Anna?" Edward asked directly, dispensing with formalities. "Eager as always," Gabriel chuckled. "Anna is preparing for the meeting. After all these years apart, we want it to be perfect." He gestured toward the entrance. "Come, I have so much to show you." Gabriel led them through luxurious corridors, decorated with modern art and photographs that Edward recognized as being from his own life with Sophia. Intimate moments captured without his knowledge and turned into trophies on the predators, And wall. Impressive collection, don't you think? Gabriel said, noticing Edward's stare. 6 years of precious moments. Sophia growing, learning, becoming the wonderful girl she is today. Sophia pointed to a photo of herself blowing out birthday. Candles. How do you have a picture of my birthday? You weren't there. Gabriel knelt to Sophia's level, his smile becoming more genuine for a moment. Ah, but I was there, little Sophia. You just couldn't see me. Edward felt nausea rising in his throat. Gabriel had violated every precious moment of their lives, turning sacred memories into scientific data. They reached an elevator that descended for several floors. When the doors opened, Edward found himself in a modern laboratory with glass walls, monitoring equipment, and cameras everywhere. In the center of the room were 2 chairs, separated by a small table. "Welcome to my laboratory," Gabriel said with evident pride. "This is where the magic happens. Every reaction, every emotion, every word will be recorded for posterity." "Where is Anna?" Edward repeated, his patience wearing thin. Gabriel pressed a button on a control panel. A glass door on the other side of the room slid open slowly, and Edward felt his heart stop. Anna entered hesitantly, escorted by a woman in a white lab coat. The girl was clean and well-dressed, but there was something deeply unsettling in her posture. Tense shoulders, eyes that constantly scanned the room for threats, movements that spoke of years of hypervigilance. When Anna saw Sophia, her reaction was like an electric shock. She stopped abruptly, her green eyes widening, and for a moment, Edward saw the vulnerable child behind the mask of self-defense that Gabriel had forced upon her. Sophia, in turn, let out a cry of joy that echoed through the sterile room. "Anna, it's you, it's really you." But as Sophia took a step toward her sister, Anna recoiled violently, pressing herself against the wall like a cornered animal. "No!" Anna screamed, her voice filled with a rage that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old. "You left me! You chose him and left me all alone!" Sophia stopped, confused and hurt by the rejection. Tears began to stream down her face. "Anna, I didn't leave you. I was too little. I always remembered you." "Liar!" Anna grabbed a pen from a lab table and threw it toward Sophia, missing by inches. "You lived in a big house while I was left alone in the dark." Edward's heart broke as he watched his 2 daughters, one desperate to reconnect, the other conditioned to reject any approach. Gabriel watched it all with scientific fascination, making notes on a tablet. "Interesting," Gabriel murmured. "The conditioned response is functioning perfectly, yet notice how Anna cannot maintain prolonged eye contact with Sophia. The original bond is still there, fighting against the conditioning." "Stop this," Edward said, his voice dangerously low. "Stop treating my daughters like specimens." Sophia, ignoring Anna's hostility, began to sing softly. "Anna and Sophie, Sophie and Anna, always together, sisters forever." Anna abruptly stopped screaming. Her hands trembled, and she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Don't sing that," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "They said you forgot that song." Sophia approached slowly, still singing, and sat on the floor a respectful distance from Anna. "I never forgot, Anna. I sing it for you every day. I dream about you every night." "Liar," Anna repeated, but her voice had lost its earlier force. Sophia pulled the pink bunny from inside her jacket. "Remember him? You always said his ear was crooked because you loved him so much." Anna stared at the toy, and Edward saw the exact moment the conditioning began to crack. Tears streamed down the girl's face as true memories fought to emerge through the lies that had been implanted in her. I remember," Anna whispered. "We used to sleep with him between us." Sophia held out the bunny toward her sister. "Do you want to hold him? He missed you too." For a moment, Anna reached out a hesitant hand, but then Gabriel intervened, striding toward the girls with scientific approval. "Excellent progress," he said, as if praising a successful experiment. "Anna, you are remembering how to respond emotionally despite the conditioning. Sophia, your persistence in the face of rejection is remarkable." Gabriel's cold, clinical comment shattered the magical moment that had been forming between the sisters. Anna recoiled again, and Sophia looked at Gabriel with an expression of disgust that surprised Edward with its maturity. "You're a mean man," Sophia said directly to Gabriel. "You hurt my sister." Gabriel laughed. "I educated your sister, Sophia. I taught her valuable lessons about real life." It was then that Edward knew the moment had come. Gabriel was so engrossed in his scientific analysis that he had let his guard down. Edward gave a discreet signal to a specific camera in the corner of the room, the prearranged signal for Marcus. In seconds, the lights went out and an emergency alarm began to blare. The chaos that followed the blackout was deafening. Alarms echoed throughout the lab as red emergency lights flashed, casting dancing shadows on the glass walls. Gabriel shouted orders at his security guards, but Edward was already in motion, scooping Sophia into his arms and heading for where Anna was cowering in the corner. "Anna, come with me!" Edward yelled over the noise of the alarms. "You don't have to stay here." But Anna, panicked by the sudden chaos, retreated even further. Her years of conditioning had taught her that sudden changes always meant punishment or greater danger. "No, you'll separate me from her again." Anna pointed at Sophia with accusation in her eyes. "You always lie." Gabriel, even amidst the chaos, maintained his scientific cool. He moved to a control panel and pressed a series of buttons. Immediately, steel doors descended, sealing all exits from the lab. "Very clever, Edward," Gabriel said, his voice echoing through the room via a speaker system. "But you forgot I built this place with every contingency in mind." Edward realized, with horror, that he had walked into a trap. Gabriel had anticipated the rescue attempt and turned the lab itself into a prison. "Now we have total privacy for the final phase of the experiment," Gabriel continued, walking calmly between the two. "Panicked girls, I want to see how you choose, Edward. Sophia or Anna, you can only save one." "This is madness," Edward shouted. "They're just children." "They're the future of behavioral science," Gabriel corrected coldly. He walked to a drawer and pulled out 2 syringes. "These contain a potent sedative, a child's dose, completely safe, but it will render them unconscious for hours." Edward's blood ran cold. "What are you planning?" "Simple. You choose which of the 2 girls you want to remain conscious. The other will be sedated and relocated permanently." Gabriel smiled cruelly. "It's the perfect dilemma to test your true paternal instincts." Sophia, still in Edward's arms, began to cry. "Daddy, I'm scared. Why does Uncle Gabriel want to hurt us?" Anna, watching the scene from her corner, saw Sophia crying, and something fundamental shifted inside her. Despite all the years of conditioning, the sight of her twin sister in danger awakened protective instincts that not even Gabriel had managed to erase. "Leave her alone," Anna said, getting to her feet unsteadily. "If you want to hurt someone, hurt me. Sophia didn't do anything wrong." Edward was stunned by Anna's courage, and Gabriel seemed genuinely surprised by the reaction. "Interesting," Gabriel muttered. "Even after years of conditioning for hatred, the protective instinct between twins remains intact." "Anna," Sophia whispered, holding out a small hand toward her sister. It was then that something no one expected happened. Anna, fighting against years of conditioning and fear, took a step towards Sophia. Then another, and another. "I remember," Anna said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I remember you used to cry when they took me away. I remember you always tried to protect me, even though you were just as little as me." Gabriel moved quickly to intercept Anna, but Edward was faster. He put Sophia down and threw himself at Gabriel, the two men tumbling to the floor in a desperate struggle for the syringes. "Sophia! Anna! Stay together!" Edward yelled as he fought. The two girls instinctively ran to each other. When their hands touched, something extraordinary happened. Anna stopped trembling, and Sophia stopped crying. It was as if an electrical circuit had been completed, reconnecting two halves of a single soul. "I never forgot you," Sophia whispered. "I pretended to hate you because it hurt too much to love you," Anna replied, hugging her sister for the first time in years. Gabriel, even as he grappled with Edward, watched the girls with a sick scientific fascination. Extraordinary. The neurological reconnection between twins is stronger than any artificial conditioning. But his distraction was costly. Edward managed to disarm Gabriel, knocking the syringes away. However, Gabriel had one last trump card. "Computer, initiate. Emergency Protocol Omega," Gabriel said loudly. A mechanical voice responded, "Protocol Omega initiated. Sedative gas release in 3 minutes." Panic seized Edward. Gabriel had programmed the lab to become a gas chamber if things got out of hand. "You're insane! Your own nieces are in here." "They're not my nieces," Gabriel said, getting up and straightening his torn suit. "They are scientific data, and if I can't conclude the experiment as planned, I can at least preserve the specimens for future study." It was then that Anna broke from Sophia's embrace and faced Gabriel with a fury that was no longer that of a conditioned child, but of a sister protecting her family. "You're not our father," Anna said, her voice small but firm. "Our father is right here," she pointed to Edward, "and you're never going to separate us again." Sophia joined her sister, the two girls holding hands as they faced the man who had destroyed their lives. "We're stronger together," Sophia said. "You don't understand that because you've never loved anyone." Gabriel looked at the two girls, and for the first time, Edward saw something beyond scientific coldness in his eyes. He saw fear. Gabriel was realizing he had completely underestimated the power of the bond between the twins. "Computer, cancel Protocol Omega," Gabriel said quickly. "Access denied. Protocol Omega cannot be cancelled after initiation." Gabriel's face went pale. He had created a system so foolproof that not even he could control it completely. 2 minutes to gas release," the mechanical voice announced. Edward looked around desperately for an escape. It was then that he heard distant explosions. Marcus and his team were forcing their way into the compound. "Hold on," Edward said, pulling both his daughters into an embrace. "Help is on the way." But as the seconds ticked by, Edward realized that help might not arrive in time. Gabriel had built a fortress, and now they were trapped inside, with time rapidly running out. 1 minute to gas release, the mechanical voice announced, as Edward held Sophia and Anna to his chest, the weight of failure crushing his shoulders. Gabriel paced like a caged animal, desperately trying to find a loophole in the system he himself had created. It was then that Anna pulled away from the hug and looked directly at Gabriel with a clarity that stunned everyone in the room. "I know the code," she said, her small voice firm. Gabriel stopped abruptly. "What did you say?" "I know the code." "To stop the machine," Anna repeated. "I saw you type it in a lot of times when you thought I was sleeping." Edward felt a spark of hope. "Anna, are you sure?" Anna nodded, but then looked at Gabriel with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "But I'll only say it if you promise one thing." "Anything," Edward said desperately. "You can never hurt children again. Ever," Anna said to Gabriel. "And you have to let everyone who works here go." Gabriel laughed, a bitter, desperate sound. "You're just a child. You don't understand the implications of what you're asking." "I understand that you made me suffer because you were suffering," Anna retorted, displaying an impossible wisdom for her age. "But it wasn't right, and you know it." 30 seconds to gas release. "Gabriel," Edward yelled, "agree to her terms." Gabriel looked at Anna, then at Sophia, and finally at Edward. For a moment, something human passed through his eyes, perhaps the recognition that he had gone too far, or perhaps just the fear of his own death. "I agree," Gabriel whispered. Anna walked to the control panel with steady steps. "Computer, override code Alpha 779er Omega. Code accepted. Protocol Omega cancelled." The relief that filled the room was palpable. Edward sank to his knees, still holding Sophia, as tears of gratitude streamed down his face. At that moment, closer explosions echoed through the walls, and finally the steel doors began to rise. Marcus appeared with his team, weapons drawn, but stopped short at the scene before him, Edward hugging the two girls, while Gabriel stood against the wall, seemingly defeated. "Everyone okay?" Marcus asked, lowering his weapon. "We are now," Edward answered, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Reed entered right behind Marcus and immediately knelt to the girls' level. "Sophia, Anna, you were both so brave." Anna looked at the psychologist with curiosity. "Who are you?" "I'm a doctor who helps kids who have been through hard things," Dr. Reed explained gently. "And I'm here to help you two become a real family." Sophia turned to Anna. "Anna, do you want to come live with me and Daddy? We have a big garden, and you can have your own room, or you can share mine." Anna hesitated, looking at Edward. "Do you really want me, even though I'm different from Sophia?" Edward knelt to Anna's level, looking directly into her green eyes. "Anna, you are my daughter, just as much as Sophia is. It doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter what they did to you. You belong in our family." "But I don't know how to be a normal family," Anna whispered. "I only know how to survive." "We'll learn together," Edward said, holding out his hand. "There's no such thing as a perfect family, Anna. There are families that love each other and take care of each other, and that's what we're going to be." Anna looked at Edward's outstretched hand, then at Sophia, who was smiling encouragingly. Slowly, she reached out her own small hand and placed it in Edward's. "Can I call you Daddy too?" Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I would be honored," Edward replied, his heart filling with a happiness he hadn't known was possible. Gabriel, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke. "Edward, No," Edward interrupted, standing to face his brother. "You lost the right to speak to me as family. Marcus, he needs to be handed over to the authorities." Gabriel nodded slowly. "I know. But Edward, you need to know, I never wanted it to come to this. I only wanted—" "You wanted to prove you were right," Edward said. "But you were wrong. Love isn't a variable you can control or manipulate. It's the only real thing we have." As Marcus and his team escorted Gabriel out, Anna tugged on Edward's sleeve. "Daddy, what will happen to the other kids who are here?" Edward knelt again. "What other kids, Anna?" "There are more kids in the labs downstairs. They're part of Gabriel's experiments too." Edward's blood ran cold again. Gabriel had been running an operation far larger than he had imagined. "Marcus!" Edward yelled. "We need to search the entire compound. There are more children here." In the hours that followed, Gabriel's compound was completely searched. They found 15 other children in various stages of different experiments, some being studied for trauma resistance, others for cognitive development under stress. All were immediately removed and placed under specialized medical care. Anna was instrumental in the rescue, knowing every corridor and secret room in the complex. She guided the rescue team with a determination that impressed everyone, showing that her traumatic experience had, paradoxically, given her the tools to save other children. When they finally left the compound, the sun was rising. Edward sat in the back of the car with Sophia on one side and Anna on the other. Both girls were exhausted, but their hands remained intertwined. "Daddy," Sophia said sleepily, "is our family complete now?" Edward looked at his two daughters, one he had raised with love and privilege, the other who had survived the unthinkable. Through strength and determination, both his daughters, both part of his soul. "Yes, honey," Edward replied, kissing both girls on the head. "Now our family is complete." 2 months after that night that changed everything, Edward woke to the sound of laughter in the garden. From his bedroom window, he saw Sophia and Anna playing on the swing set he had specially installed for them, a double swing where they could swing together, side by side, as they always should have been. The transformation had been slow but steady. Anna still had occasional nightmares and moments of hypervigilance, but her therapy with Dr. Reed was helping her rebuild her capacity to trust. Sophia, for her part, had become an incredibly patient, protective sister, always willing to wait when Anna needed space, always ready with a hug when Anna finally allowed herself to be vulnerable. Edward went down to the garden, carrying a tray of hot chocolate, a morning tradition Anna had requested after discovering she'd never had real hot chocolate before. The small family routines were becoming anchors, helping Anna understand what it meant to belong. "Good morning, girls," Edward said, placing the tray on the garden table. "Daddy! Daddy!" Sophia yelled, jumping off the swing. Anna made it all, the way to the top by herself today. Edward looked at Anna, who had stopped swinging, but was smiling shyly. "Is that right? That's wonderful, Anna." Anna got off the swing and approached, still cautious with displays of affection, but definitely more relaxed than in the early days. "I only did it because Sophia kept cheering for me." "We always cheer for each other," Sophia said, taking her sister's hand naturally. "That's what sisters do." As the girls drank their hot chocolate, Edward reflected on how their lives had changed. He had sold his company, unable to continue in the business world after discovering how he had been manipulated. Instead, he had started a foundation dedicated to combating child trafficking and abuse, using his fortune to ensure what Gabriel had done would never happen to other families. Gabriel was awaiting trial, his organization completely dismantled. The 15 rescued children were all in rehabilitation, some already reunited with biological families, others, like Anna, learning what it meant to be unconditionally loved for the first time. "Daddy," Anna said, interrupting his thoughts, "Dr. Reed says I can start regular school next month." Edward smiled. "How do you feel about that?" Anna hesitated as she always did before sharing feelings. "Scared, but excited too. Sophia said she'll introduce me to all her friends. And I'll sit with you at recess until you make your own." "Friends," Sophia added decisively. "You two are amazing," Edward said, his chest swelling with pride and love. At that moment, Dr. Reed arrived for their weekly family therapy session. Over the past 2 months, she had become not just a therapist, but a dear family friend. "How is our family today?" Dr. Reed asked, sitting at the garden table. "Anna swung really high today," Sophia announced proudly. "And Sophia taught me a new song," Anna added. "One that isn't sad." Dr. Reed smiled. "You two are making extraordinary progress." "Anna, how do you feel when you think about the future now?" Anna was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts as Dr. Reed had taught her. "Before, I didn't think about the future. I only thought about surviving today, but now She glanced at Sophia and Edward. Now I think about things I want to do, like learn to ride a bike like Sophia, or get a dog, or maybe be a doctor like you to help other kids. Edward felt tears form in his eyes. Anna was finally able to dream, something Gabriel had tried to take from her forever. And you, Sophia? Dr. Reed asked. How has it been having a sister? Sophia beamed. It's the best thing in the world. I always wanted a sister, but I didn't. No, I already had one. Now I understand why I always felt like something was missing. Anna is very brave, Sophia continued. She taught me that you can be strong even when you're scared. And she makes me laugh with funny stories about how she used to escape the boring adults at the lab. Anna giggled, a sound that still surprised Edward every time he heard it. I was very clever. One time I pretended to be sick so I wouldn't have to take the bad medicine. The therapy session unfolded in the serenity of the garden, with the girls sharing discoveries from the week, and Edward talking about his own challenges in adapting to the new reality. Discovering Gabriel was alive, and that his entire life had been manipulated had left deep scars, but the joy of having Anna in his life outweighed all the pain. As Dr. Reed prepared to leave, Anna ran up to her and hugged her, something that would have been unthinkable in the first few weeks. Thank you for helping me not be so scared anymore, Anna said. You were always brave, Anna, Dr. Reed replied. I just helped you remember that. That afternoon, Edward found the two girls in Sophia's room, which had now become their room. Anna had chosen to keep her own bed, but they slept with the beds pushed together, holding hands during the night when the nightmares came. They were drawing together, an activity that had become an important therapeutic outlet. Anna's drawings no longer showed shadowy figures and separation. Now they were full of color, houses with gardens, and always two girls holding hands. What are you drawing today? Edward asked. Our family, Sophia said. Look, this is you, this is me, this is Anna, and this little dot here is the dog we're going to adopt. Edward laughed. A dog? Since when did we decide to adopt a dog? Since now, Anna said with a mischievous smile that looked very much like Sophia's. Anna and I voted, 2 against 1. Ah, I see. Family democracy, Edward joked. And what kind of dog do you want? One that needs a family too, Anna said seriously, like I did. Edward knelt beside his daughters, looking at the colorful drawing that represented the family they had become. It wasn't the family he had planned, but it was perfect in its imperfection, strong in its vulnerability. Girls, Edward said, you know I love you more than anything in the world, right? We know, Daddy, they said in unison, throwing themselves into his arms for a group hug. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Edward stood on the balcony watching the stars. Marcus stopped by, as he did periodically, to check on how the family was adjusting. How are you doing, Edward? Marcus asked, joining him on the balcony. Different, Edward answered honestly. Gabriel took so much from me, but he also gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Anna taught me that strength doesn't come from never falling, but from always getting back up. And the girls, Edward smiled. They're healing each other. Sophia is learning that the world can be cruel, but that makes kindness more important. Anna is learning that not every adult will hurt her, that some people are worthy of trust. And the future? Edward looked through the window, where he could see his two daughters sleeping, holding hands. The future is theirs. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure they have everything Gabriel tried to take away. Love, security, and the freedom to just be kids. The next morning, Edward woke again to laughter in the garden. Sophia and Anna were singing, together as they watered the flowers they had planted the week before. The melody was new, one they had created together, but it carried echoes of the old song that had kept them connected through the years of separation. Edward went down to joined them carrying hot chocolate and a heart full of gratitude. He had lost a brother to madness, but he had gained a family built on true love. The scars would remain, on Anna, on Sophia, on himself. But they had learned that scars were just proof they had survived, and that love was stronger than any trauma. Anna and Sophie, Sophie and Anna, the girls sang, always together, sisters forever. Edward joined in the song, his voice blending with theirs as the morning sun bathed their garden in golden light. They were a family, not perfect, but real, not without pain, but full of hope. And for the first time in a long time, Edward knew, with absolute certainty, that the future would be better than the past.